Everybody, welcome to the final hours of the 2010s. How's it going?
Less than 5 hours left, at least Pacific time.
I got, well, that's a good way to play it off. Yeah, 3 hours left here, but I figured now would be best time as any to talk about the 2010s, what it means, what happened, and where it's going to go historically.
Yep, we're gonna do a brief 2010s rewind, and by brief I mean it's not going to be short, but as Filthy and I were discussing before the stream, what we've found is that everything is kind of connected together in a somewhat abstract but simultaneously very tangible kind of way.
Well, typically, what happens is that everything is following a certain theme, a certain idea that is repeated across certain decades as it follows actually a very clear historical pattern that's observable over multiple centuries. But, anyways, like what inspired this is that I was on the voice chat of SO's server the other day, and someone asked me what I thought the defining moment of the 2010s is. So that would be 2010 to 2019. And I thought about it for a bit, and for some reason, I kept coming back to the 2008 financial crisis. Now, I might be a little biased because I made the 2008 financial crisis video, which is really great, and you all definitely should watch it if you haven't already.
It
Uh,
really is.
Thank you. But yes, the 2010s is largely defined by an event that took place before the 2010s. And the reason for this is because of, well, if you're at least familiar with my content, especially my older content, then you know about the fourth turning and the seculums. The way it works is that there is a repeating cycle in history that is observable of a crisis happening basically every 80 years. And we're at that crisis phase. However, every turning, of which there are four every 80 years, is initiated by some spark of history, some defining event, usually, that marks a transition from, say, a first turning to a second turning. In this case, the 2008 financial crisis marked a transitory state between the third turning of the 90s and the early 00s into the fourth turning, which is 2008 onwards into the current decade. And I think everything that's been happening in the last decade or so can be best defined and best explained by, well, the fourth turning, which is to say that there is a very clear disease in society, that there's an understanding that something is horribly wrong, and that the current status quo, the current regime, whoever is in power, it's not working, and that there needs to be a significant change. Ultimately, this is going to come to a head, often in some major apocalyptic way, but whatever happens, there is going to be a very clear and unambiguous outcome. We're not at that point yet, but we're definitely in the point of unease in a certain sense that something in society is horribly, horribly wrong. Though the overwhelming majority of people, definitely not you guys if you're watching this, but the overwhelming majority of normies are not going to be able to put their finger on what exactly is terribly wrong.
Yeah, and I would say we're well past the point where there's unease. I'd say the point of unease would have been the 2008 financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've always like you and I have had a couple of clashes previously about the four turnings, mainly because I misunderstood uh sort of how the explanation of the four turnings worked, or how it was explained. It's not historical determinism, it's just that society as it exists now and the sort of parameters created for society by the state and by the concept of political rule is going to limit the possible outcomes of social interaction. And as we've sort of gone over, states are unsustainable, and they're unsustainable because of how states inherently have to function. And I've gone over that in extensive detail in the past. Not so that's not really a deterministic perspective to say that states are eventually going to collapse and there are eventually going to be disasters at points within history in every state society. But given that, that's really what I think fourth turn the turnings are. It's points of financial development within the history of state societies.
Mhm. Well, typically the way it works is that after a crisis, there's going to be a period of post-war boom, as there's a large number of new industries, new jobs, new careers being built, and just generally this great sense of opportunity. Now, we did get a super chat from Pumpkin Row who says that he ships me and you together.
I don't have an objection to that.
I mean, I'm flattered, but I don't feel that way about you. I'm sorry.
If it's just our avatars, fine.
I mean, I can't stop people from writing fan fiction, though you'll have to label it as AU. But
Oh, I think
anyways,
that my before I clarified, I was just talking about our avatars. That
yeah.
alone, it's funny. It's just this stream, but that very easily could qualify as a candidate for the most awkward moment of the 2010s.
Possibly, I'm not. It could be any number of things. Yeah, probably. So, anyways, so what we were talking about before, I kind of lost my train of thought.
I was talking about explaining the four turnings, and that was always my objection to it, is I didn't really understand it because, to be fair, it was just sort of presented as if the four turnings or the Strauss-Howe generational theory, it's just kind of an axiom in and of itself, but there was nothing really explaining the foundation of that axiom. So I didn't understand it, but I came to sort of, I learned things later on, which kind of showed me, oh, well, it's true. It's just there's needs to be some foundation set in place in order for most people to begin to approach it as anything more than just sort of conventional wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, the fourth turnings are not historicism. They're not a guarantee. It's just an observation and people replying to incentives that exist structurally. Whether or not there actually will be four turnings after the state has collapsed, honestly, I've been wrestling with that myself because society will change in so many fundamental ways that I can't even conceive of, that it would be, I don't think I would be competent to make that judgment one way or another. It's possible that we'll escape a cycle. However, it's also entirely possible that we'll just be continuing this thing for all time, as it's just some form of it's just some aspect of how humans respond to incentives and the material conditions in which they exist in that are ultimately independent of the state. But I mean, it's something that we'll see in the future. But anyways, back to the topic of the decade. Well, I mean, I think you can see that this kind of social distrust, this belief that something is terribly wrong and there needs to be a great amount of change, is something that can be easily observed in the 2010s. I mean, just a perfect example is that very early on in the decade, 2011, 2012, if I recall correctly, you had Edward Snowden coming out talking about all of the government surveillance programs and basically confirming a lot of the so-called conspiracy theories that people had about government surveillance, government manipulation of data.
Yeah, revealing Prism.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that you hear about Prism quite a bit. You hear that it was just pertaining to NSA surveillance, but what you don't hear are the aspects of Prism which go into extensive detail about how the government was able to manipulate media narratives covertly.
Mm-hmm. And you can also see that with Operation Mockingbird and Operation Choke Point, which is a direct attempt to, well, coerce people through their finances.
Yeah, well, that has influenced media narratives in the sense that the state has been able to say, "Oh, look at these private institutions acting ideologically and using that to try and both manipulate the population and further into the culture war psyop, but also to create a sort of necessity for itself to manufacture it's a classic problem reaction solution setup."
Yeah, and I just want to clarify something that Invergent talked about. Excuse me. The four turnings do predate central banking. I mean, Strauss and Howe talked about or cited several texts from the Roman Empire where they observed the fourth turning completely independently, or they observed the four turnings.
Well, the Roman Empire had central banks. It
Mm-hmm.
had a central bank, I mean. So I guess that I'd say that differently. Central banks existed, it's just the Rothschilds didn't yet.
Mm-hmm. And the current pattern of four turnings, I believe, can be traced all the way back to the 1400s, if I recall correctly, which is a bit before central banking, or at least modern forms of central banking. But
But
anyway,
just what I was going to say about Prism is that rather ironically how Prism was covered in the media is ironically a great example of how the state will actually try and control narratives. Forcibly suppressing content, that's not how the state approaches this. They understand full well that by doing that, it draws more attention to whatever they were trying to suppress. As a matter of fact, the state does that nowadays. They'll shut down certain content, like Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro. They'll censor them to give people the impression, to try and lead them to believe that that is content which the state is trying to suppress because it is harmful to the status quo.
same thing that they did with Alex Jones. I mean, you think that people in the NSA whose careers depend on censorship and misinformation are not aware of the Streisand effect? Of course they
No,
are.
yeah, on top the state and these cartels and these firms the state operate through, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually on marketing research. They know exactly what they're doing. On top on top of that, we've seen the state has actually used this very tactic as a psychological operation on record before. So, I mean, just the idea that, oh, the state wouldn't suppress content that the state likes or the state approves of. I mean, you really have to step back and question whether or not, that's actually just an uncontroversial opinion that found based upon your own reasoning, or you came to that conclusion through critical thinking. Uh, or was it something that was planted uncritically into your thought process? Was it something you were led to because some news anchor said it and you didn't really give it any second thoughts?
The state has numerous ways to actually bury content they don't like. You see this nowadays with YouTube just keeping channels that they don't like outside of the algorithms or silently shadow banning them. They've been doing
But
this for a long time, and this is
right.
largely the status quo.
But
This
what
is
I was
perhaps the. Sorry.
but what I was gonna say about Prism is that sort of narrative control is exactly what the sort of thing that the state does when the genie's out of the bottle. and there's no going back, but the narrative can still be co-opted. And that's exactly what they did. They only focused on the surveillance aspects so that the media control aspect was completely omitted. So now people don't even realize the full extent to what was revealed in the Snowden links because they leaks. I mean, because they only focused on a very small aspect of it, and an aspect of it which everyone already kind of knew in the first place. So they were basically able to sort of confine what people were talking about and what people were focusing on by themselves co-opting the leak.
More importantly, like you said yourself, that they control the media. What aspects, like, do they want you to see? What are the least damaging, or at least the least consequential parts of the leak that the mainstream media can talk about, can bring in fake experts to talk about, and can propagandize to people about, like, oh, this isn't really that big of a problem as people make it out to be. Oh, sure, we're getting they're spying on us a little bit, like just a little bit, but think of all the terrorists that were stopped because of this. The FBI stopped 500,000 terrorist plots in just the last 3 hours because of this program. How many people would have died if he didn't have this?
I
And just
mean,
generally logical fallacies like that.
yeah, TSA checkpoints have routinely been shown to not actually stop anything.
I still remember a study from, I don't remember when it was, but I've seen it like years ago, even before I became an anarchist, about how there was a study done, like bringing people through TSA and bringing people through private airport security. The TSA had a 95% failure rate, while private security had a 5% failure rate.
But even, I mean, even then, I remember that government shutdown, quote unquote, at the earlier part of this year. So I guess this is a 2019 recap. And I was looking to fly somewhere. And in the time where the government was shut down, quote unquote, the cost of flight went down like $300.
And how many people, how many planes got blown up in that time?
Well, not that I can remember.
So what you're saying is that the TSA is of no consequence in protecting people?
Yeah,
That's
pretty
so
much. I mean, it seems
that's
that way.
that's so weird. It's not like it's security theater or anything like that. They couldn't just be putting on a show for their benefit and to propagandize to us, could they?
It's not like planes existed for almost 100 years prior to 9/11,
It's
and it was. I mean, life has largely not been that much different since 9/11. At least air travel hasn't, except of course for the fact that it's much more expensive to fly because of the TSA.
it's freaking. I actually don't remember that bit about the $300 tickets being cheaper.
Well, that was never that wasn't covered by the media. That was just something which I noticed when I was shopping around for the prices of flight.
Ah, yeah, I didn't hear about that or see that at all. So this is new information to me.
Yeah, and it was just US prices which were affected, which confirms to me that's what it was. If you wanted to fly to Canada, it was still like $900, but if you wanted to fly to like Chicago or whatever, it was like $300.
Nice. Yeah, that is significantly cheaper. Now let me see here. What else do we have that's happened in the 2010s? Like, it's kind of weird because we're in a position where there's a lot to go over an entire decade, but you're also kind of paralyzed with, like, what do you talk about?
Well, I kind of already brought it up, but the culture war.
That's kind of been ongoing for as long as I can remember, actually.
Well, that's sort of a an elephant in the room for sure, because that's what a lot of people are talking about. But this is something which I've noticed very recently, and we were talking about this before stream. I was going to actually make like a video compilation of this based on old archival footage that I've been able to find of media broadcasts going back to the 1950s. But what I've found is that at any given time there are only three narratives. It's the three exact same narratives in American politics, but they just change around the figures and the subject of interest or the groups that they're talking about, but it's always the same three narratives. Either the president is doing something worthy of being impeached or should be impeached, and the other side is saying, well, look at these guys trying to get rid of this president. How undemocratic of them. There's of course the culture war aspect. There's one group of political insurgents, and who that group is determined by the outlet which is advertising to your particular political allegiance. And then there's the status quo, which needs to be maintained because the status quo is good.
The status quo is God.
Right. And the other one that I noticed out of these narratives was, hold on just a moment. I had these written down, and that's what I forgot the fucking third one.
All right. But I think it's interesting we can go into the culture war because that's actually a pretty significant thing that happened in this decade as well. I'm sure we all remember.
Terrorism. Terrorism was the third one. There's
Ah.
always a looming national security threat which the government needs to take care of. That's the third narrative.
It's kind of been their playbook since the New Deal that there's always this great external threat that always needs to be taken care of, that we need to be protected from. Largely because that in the 1930s and 1940s, they had, like, you can even find stuff about them talking about this, how members of the Roosevelt regime, they wanted a war economy. They wanted a war because they wanted to be able to control people. They wanted to be able to socially engineer society. However, they understood that if there was no great external threat which people could rally against, then they couldn't possibly justify the kind of central planning that they wanted. So it makes sense for them to have some great external threat, whether it be Palestinian terrorism, the IRA, Taliban, take your pick. There's always going to be something that's always going to be a threat to the U.S. and its interests. And
But
this even goes before the 1930s. I just remembered because, like, what is it? The U.S. has been at war for all but a few years of its existence.
yeah, I can't remember when it wasn't.
Yeah, and I remember there's like a website that keeps track of when the U.S. like the years the U.S. has been at war and what conflicts the U.S. was embroiled in during those years. And there's only like a handful of them where the U.S. was actually at peace. Suffice to say that, yeah, the U.S. very like any totalitarian dictatorship, the United States definitely relies on some great external existential threat in order to justify its regime. Even if there's peacetime, people are going to start to realize that it's the government that's acting against their interest, as it's the only malfactor that they can conceive of in their lives. In the absence of this, well, if people realize this, then they'll be more inclined to engage in subversive action, whether that be protest, revolution, armed insurrection, or just simple counter economics.
Well, people aren't motivated to subvert the system if they've internalized the system as being something which functions ultimately in their interests.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the state focuses as much as it possibly can, aside from exerting its influence over society to obtain more revenue, also trying to ensure that as many people as possible come to that conclusion. Hence why the state sees it as being so important to control the spread of information and the way narratives are conveyed.
You can see this nowadays with them trying so desperately to get control of the internet. What was that article you sent me that the internet has basically become a breeding ground and a safe haven, a headquarters
Oh
for
yeah,
international terrorism or something like that?
there's this hilarious article which is talking about crypto anarchists, and it's like people trading Bitcoin, people talking in private encrypted chats, and the headline of the article is, hold on, let me
I
fucking
found it.
real quick. Yeah,
The
just read.
web is a terrorist's command and control network of choice. I'm gonna
Oh my
post a
god,
link to
they couldn't use more spooky language if they tried.
it. I posted a link to it in chat, so if you guys want to check it out for yourself, it's there.
Crypto anarchists are terrorists.
I mean, it takes one to know one, I guess, considering that the government or that all politics is terrorism.
I was just a boy when the infidels came to my village in their Black Hawk helicopters. The statists fired at the oil fields, and they lit up like the eyes of Allah. Burning oil rained down from the sky and cooked everything it touched. I could only hide myself and cry as my bitcoins were consumed by the fiery black liquid death. In the midst of the chaos, I could swear I heard my crypto screaming for help. As quickly as they'd come, the statists were gone. It was the day I put a jihad on them. And if you don't believe it, then you'd better kill me now, because I'll put a jihad on you too.
Oh, that is perfect. Did you just come up with that now?
No, I fucking read that directly from the script of Team America. I just replaced some of the words with references to libertarianism.
I feel like that needs to be in the video at some point.
Well, I'm gonna clip parts of this stream and then upload it afterwards, so I'll make sure and put that in the highlights.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But yeah,
back
I
to
just
the culture war.
shut up, statist infidel. But just what I was gonna. Oh my god, chat's popping off right now. They must have loved that. But anyway, yeah, what I was gonna say about the culture war is a lot of people think of that as being sort of a defining point, which this decade is sort of centered around. But what I was going to say, and sort of my point, is it's really not. But what is unique, at least within recent history, is the socio-political order being based around anything other than the party system as it's existed, which for the last 100 years or so has been what it was. It seems like this current culture war, as it's sort of being personified now, is attempting to establish a new socio-political order, but that's not to say it's a different socio-political order. Fundamentally, it is the same socio-political order. It's operating for the exact same interests. It pushes the same narratives, same underlying ideas. Nothing's different. It just involves different groups. Instead of parties, it's now Marxists and reactionaries.
Pretty much, like the previous socio-political order, that came after the Roosevelt regime, was basically the New Deal Democrats who largely consolidated around the ideas of fascism or economic fascism, central planning, and a permanent wartime economy, while their opposition, the Republicans and later the conservatives, were largely defined by their opposition to that. And their opposition basically just amounts to, well, the same exact thing, but less of it. And Pumpkin Row just sent a super chat for $2, asking you to say that again, but in the Batman voice.
I don't have a fucking Batman.
He doesn't have a Batman voice.
I will say the line that came immediately after that in the movie, though, and like my best like Punjabi voice, because I have a pretty decent Punjabi impression. You have balls. I like balls.
Where are the drugs, SO? Where are the drugs?
I'm gonna take them after stream.
Give them to me.
No,
I don't think you can. You can't.
well, even if I could, I wouldn't.
Aw. But anyways, so yeah, we have a new social. You have a new social political order that's they're trying to establish. The problem with the problem with the New Deal Democrats and the conservatives is that they largely disagree on economic issues, and that you have one side of that paradigm that is at least somewhat skeptical of state power. In practice, they really aren't, but
Well,
they at least
they're not skeptical of state power. That's the point of the culture war for this particular narrative. Whereas,
that. I was
oh,
getting to that.
sorry.
I'm talking about New Deal Democrats versus conservatives. The New Deal Democrats are just like, yeah, gung ho, let's have a totalitarian dictatorship, while the conservatives are just like, hang on a second, let's have half of a totalitarian dictatorship. Whereas the new culture war they're trying to establish, there's no halfway point. There's no narrative state skepticism. Although naturally the Marxists and the ethno nationalists have a lot that they do legitimately disagree on, the fundamental premise that they both agree on is that it is the state's role to socially engineer and coerce society into conforming to whatever set of arbitrary moral principles that they hold.
I mean, I don't know if I'd necessarily even agree with that. I think that what's changed fundamentally is that previously the sort of allegiance which was being established to the state, the incentive which people were supposed to have for thinking of the state as being a representation of their interests, was based around the party system. And both of the parties were representing more broadly different marginal preferences. And what's changed, that part remains the same about the new allegiances in this socio-political order representing marginal preferences, except the difference is instead of internalizing, sort of how the state represents their interests based around parties, these allegiances look at the state directly as being a representation of their interests.
Well, it's the only way that they can't get their interests fulfilled.
Like they
They
they try and redefine the state and how they look at the state in a way where the state is just an instrument for them to have their interests met. Whereas previously there was the partyarchy mythology where, oh, the state's bad, but if this party is in control, then the state represents my interests.
This is actually similar to the left-right political dichotomy around the turn of the century in like the 1900s of the pietists versus the liturgicals, which was very similarly a paradigm largely defined by the culture war, except that the pietists, if I recall correctly, were a lot more about, yeah, let's not get the state involved in controlling people's behavior, whereas the liturgicals were very similar to the ethno nationalists of today, which is getting the government to force people to conform to their moral preferences.
Now, a lot of people are scared of this, but I mean, aside from the fact we already kind of brought up where throughout the 2020s, the counter economy, as soon as the political economy does collapse, which it's looking like it's eventually going to, um, we're not going to be doomed with one of those two legitimacy tools. Like, it's not going to be an ethno-nationalist or a Marxist order, because there's not going to be another state. That's the first thing. But the only thing I can really see in conclusion here is that it's a good thing for libertarians. And why I say it's a good thing for libertarians is I think that the state overlooked this, but they forgot that the main thing which was holding libertarians back was them, through the media, trying to marry libertarianism with conservatism. And now that mainstream conservatism is going in this sort of neo-reactionary direction, now libertarianism is not married to conservatism, which means libertarianism can reach its full power level.
And of course, people already severely overestimate the power that the Marxists and the ethno-nationalists have. Their actual power and influence is hugely magnified because one, they are overwhelmingly active on social media, and so people will just assume that they're a lot more numerous than they actually are. Which they probably in the United States is probably like maybe 10,000 people total. And secondly, when they do rally, well, the government goes out of their way to not only help them, but to make sure that any damage they cause is a lot more severe than it otherwise would be. I mean, how many Antifa rallies have there been where the police were given stand down orders? They otherwise could contain the situation, but they stand by and basically give them a free pass to do whatever the hell they want.
And by contain the situation, we're not saying send the police after people for their political opinions. No, we're referring to the rioting.
Yeah,
Like
of course.
in all of the sort of riots that have happened in Berkeley and Portland, in all of those occasions, the mayors gave stand down orders to the police, specifically just to let the Antifa beat the crap out of people.
And burn trash cans. Like, I'm still waiting for a straight answer from Antifa as to how many trash cans were away from an anarcho-communist society.
No idea. Well, I mean, that's also because as a society, there's not going to be an anarcho-communist society.
Of
It,
course.
it can only exist in small communities at most, but that's stretching the definition of communism.
Hmm. Now, of course, I think we've already explained like why the state very much has an incentive for this to become the new thing. The question is, I think more importantly, and one that's going to be overlooked by the overwhelming majority of people, is whether or not the state is actually going to be able to keep this sustained. Mostly because, well, they're having trouble funding themselves as it is. Like in the last decade, what was the national debt in 2010 in the US?
It was like 20 trillion, I think,
I said
approaching.
2010, not.
Well, now it's 23 trillion, 22 trillion.
Let me look this up real quick.
Okay.
2010 national debt. Uh, yeah, it was around 13 trillion. Now it's 23 trillion.
Oh, damn, that blew up pretty quick.
It's increased by 10 trillion over 10 years. I mean, if you had a bank account that
Yeah,
increased by $1 million, just a flat increase of $1 million every day since the birth of Jesus Christ, you wouldn't have $1 trillion in today's dollar. You wouldn't have $1 trillion today.
yeah, that's fucking way worse than initially thought that it was. But no, that's not even remotely surprising because towards the end of the 2010s, and this is something I was talking with you about before the stream started, but something which is, I'd say, since like 2016, this has become sort of increasingly noticeable. But every year, something that I've noticed is that, like, when you're buying food from the grocery store or just anything where the main utility of it is in the quantity of units per purchase, what I've noticed is that it's costing more, and what uh, is actually in each unit is significantly less. And that is, I'd say there are a lot of factors for that. Increasing minimum wage, the increasing barrier of entry for most markets because of the regulation. So limiting competition, not just competition, but limiting the people that are actually able to produce commodities, and therefore resulting in less commodities being produced and less resources available as a result. But ultimately, the main reason for this is banking, and fractional reserve banking specifically, and the increasing debt. There's this impression that there's a greater amount of wealth that exists, so people are operating around that, but there just aren't that many resources. So, in trying to allocate, these resources to match sort of what is expected of them according to their stock figures, they sort of half-ass it. Like they I don't know, like just take in, for example, a bag of chips. They'll fill the bag half full, half of it's air, half of it's chips, to give the impression that to their stockholders that they're selling the same thing.
And this is something that we're seeing a lot of today. Mostly like, in the last few weeks, we've started seeing the Fed engage in rampant, oh, it's not money printing, you guys. It's not QE4, though we're increasing our balance books by 120, what is it, a million or billion dollars
It's
every day?
120 billion a day. A day. Just to
That's,
put, just to put that into perspective, the entire bailout in 2008 was 800 billion. So
and they're going to match that in a week.
in a week they'll have surpassed that.
In 2 weeks, they'll have surpassed all of the numerous bailouts and stimulus packages that were given during the 2008 financial crisis in order to try to stop it from happening. And there isn't even an official crisis yet. I mean, sure, you have economists ringing the bells now that what's going on is not sustainable, but the fact of the matter is, like, the Fed is clearly in crisis mode. This is blatantly obvious. And for some reason, like as Inversion said, no one's talking about it.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of people talking about it, just not in the media. It really is the biggest thing going on right now, or at least it will be the biggest thing everybody is talking about once the fucking economy collapses. But right now, we're just sort of seeing the stepping stone towards that.
We are 12 years into the fourth turning, and we have yet to hit an actual crisis. Now, what do I mean by crisis? Well, in the previous fourth turnings, at least in the United States history, we had World War II, the War of Northern Aggression, and the Revolutionary War. There's no guarantee that every fourth turning is necessarily going to result in a gigantic war, although the pattern of history clearly indicates that that's highly likely. Well, there's a very good chance that the worst is yet to come. And that's very unfortunate to say. But the fact of the matter is that, as Esso observed, it's becoming a lot harder for people to simply make ends meet. It's becoming increasingly unaffordable to just simply live. Like, I think 50 to 60% on average of people's assets and earning power goes into rent. And I think a very large majority of Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings, which is kind of what you need in case of an emergency, such as car breaking down, unexpected medical expenses that need to be paid as part of a copay. It's, yeah, people are basically hanging on financially by a thread. And what's been the main catalyst of revolutions throughout history has been people being unable to afford basic necessities, that the current political economy is literally antagonistic to their survival.
And here's the other thing, which I just sent you in DMs over Discord. Every central bank simultaneously has been conducting QE simultaneously for the last year. So that's another thing. And something to note from that is it's getting so obvious at this point that the economy, at the political economy, the white market, is just a house of cards. That every time that the Federal Reserve, conducts a contraction, um, automatically that results in a drop in stock prices. Every single major drop in the Dow Jones and S&P 500 we've seen over the last few months, that was followed at the exact same time with a contraction of the Fed.
Suffice to say, like, they're just in absolute horrific crisis mode, and it's hard to say like what's actually going to come of it. But don't think that people are going to find it possible to continue to survive under the current regime, and I think it's going to be the main catalyst. Now, whether or not the United States government is or is not aware of this, I mean, I operate under the assumption that they're aware, but it seems to me that their continued attempts to drive us into either becoming an ethno-nationalist fascist or a SJW Marxist, it strikes me as kind of tone deaf, honestly.
I don't know if they're just, kind of running with it while they can, or if they genuinely think that there's still a chance for them in the future.
There might actually be a good chance that they genuinely believe that it can keep going indefinitely, since uh, the mainstream thought in economics in the government is modern monetary theory, which is basically just, yeah, debt doesn't really matter.
I mean, that's kind of what you would have to believe in order to think that this can continue going on. So that's kind of just that's kind of a circular argument there.
It's that's basically what you absolutely positively need to believe, and that's the only way I can think we can do so. But anyways, I think we should shift topics a bit towards Donald Trump, since if we're talking about the
Oh
2010s,
yeah.
and we kind of have to.
If you're talking about the 2010s in politics, I don't think that you can not mention Donald Trump.
Now, I think we talked about this before the stream, and what I said before is that I think like he's trying to be set up to be a figure around which the new order will rally around. We've had figures like this before. Like every fourth turning itself is divided into four phases, and this it's either the second phase or the third phase. I can't quite remember which. That there is a regeneracy, which is a new political or a new order arises around a new set of beliefs and a new philosophy, and it rallies around a leader who basically drives the country or society into the new era, out of the old and into the new. Previous ones in American history were FDR, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington. Basically, these gigantic colossi of history. And it looks like that Donald Trump was at least set up to be this new figure that people regenerate around. Now, naturally, like there's no consensus around who this new figure is, and they're going to be very controversial. During the New Deal, for example, that there was a lot of criticism about FDR being a dictator, being an economic central planner and a fascist. All of those criticisms were completely true. There was also criticism around Abraham Lincoln being a tyrant, being antagonistic to people's civil liberties and basically causing the war. This, of course, was also true. Now, with Donald Trump, well, I'm pretty sure you're familiar. I'm pretty sure our audience is at least familiar with our thoughts on him. But suffice to say, I think he's trying to be set up as the new figure, the new creature that everybody's going to try to regenerate around, and around whom they're going to try to set up as the new great hero of history.
Oh, obviously they are. I mean, if you were to listen to the mainstream media, any outlets appealing to any particular marginal preference, I mean, that just every single time they talk about him or anything that they do at this point, they boldly and brazenly lie about what actually is happening. Like a great example of which would be the constant repetition of Trump is getting rid of regulations just like he said he was. Are you fucking kidding me? All you have to do is go to the Federal Register, the Federal Register's website, and you can see that on average there is 200 new federal regulations being created every single day. Trump is a swamp creature, my friend. My
And
dude.
didn't we look up like how many regulations he's repealed since he's been in office? And isn't that number something like 42?
It's like 42.
Oh, but he's repealed 16 regulations for every one regulation that's passed. Like maybe in one day he did. I don't know. Like he just of all the 42 regulations, he just cut out half of them in like 2 days.
No, we got an edgelord in the chat. So I think he's not a troll, but he says fuck Christianity, which is another thing to talk about. The atheism aspect of the culture war. The culture war has actually changed throughout the 2010s, and it started off as atheism versus religion.
That was kind of a 2000s thing. I think it was just kind of a spillover, much in the same way that you still have skeptards pushing the same content that they did in the 2015s and 2016s. You had atheism channels
Kekistan.
trying to.
Filthy. I am Kekistan.
Oh dear, we need to take this guy back and get rid of him. But yeah, I don't think so. I think what was happening is that there was already kind of a transition because I remember in 2010, the main thing was Obamacare. That's what everyone was talking about. And afterwards, it kind of just you started to see people talking about gender. That started to really come about. And then finally we got like the SJWs like really started to emerge. And there was a big battle culminating in, I think it peaked around Gamergate.
Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter because ultimately that's kind of what I was talking about when I was referring to sort of a manufactured culture war. That's basically where it started. But yeah, ultimately, how the Gamergators, Sargon and whoever, how they're able to have the influence that they do. Well, it's ultimately because the state wanted them to. I don't know if they're state actors directly themselves. I assume, that some of them aren't, though the amount of influence that Sargon has even in state media is very fucking questionable, to say the least. But, yeah, that was a manufactured conflict. The conclusion of it was manufactured, and the media scandal around it, the reaction was manufactured deliberately.
Very much so. Now, one thing I definitely wanted to talk about, and we were talking about this just before the stream, is we were going to get into the entertainment of the 2010s and basically how that defines the decade. You can see this largely throughout history, It's not a fourth turning thing. It's something that's been observed independent of it.
It's Scrollax, Niger.
What?
Oh, it's there's this channel making fun of Skrillex, and one of his songs opens up with it's Scrollax because his channel's name is Scrollax, but he didn't say Niger. What he said has two G's.
Beautiful. Now, anyways,
It's a reference to that song.
yeah. But anyways, you can look at say the Roaring Twenties, the original Roaring Twenties, where music was you had the Charleston, you had dance halls, the very upbeat music, and then compare that to the 30s when you had jazz and blues and just generally like a lot less upbeat, a lot more solemn and depressing. It's a whole mood thing that's largely going to be defining the decade. Now, which tail wags the dog or which dog wags the tail is a discussion for another time, perhaps. But there is a reflection in the mood of the country and society in its pop culture, and I think that's makes this a topic worthy of discussion in regards to the 2010s. I mean, we were talking about this before. The music nowadays, you remember how we were talking about earlier how manufactured a lot of these crises are? We have fake flag or false flag mass shootings, a lot of events that happen that are largely orchestrated by the government, either directly or indirectly. The same thing is reflected in the music, actually, where a lot of the popular artists, so called artists, are basically just reading music that was written by one of two people. Most music nowadays is written by two guys.
Which, by the way, we were the ones, Filthy and I, it was actually earlier this year, we were the ones who pointed out that the government was radicalizing people to try and get them to do mass shootings through image boards. And that turned into the truth about the Christchurch shooting meme. So, yeah, an apology would be nice, but I'm not expecting one.
I demand an apology. I mean, we talked about this before. I'm in the video too. I mean, the meme that gets posted around has you in front of my background. I made that. Why don't I get the meme? I am in the video. I am not subtle at all. Where am I? How come you get freaking memed and I'm like, who is that lizard guy? Freaking hell. This actually bothers me. It means I'm not being effective.
I don't know. I mean, if we were really to go on about it, I'm not too pissed off about it, like just the meme in general. But yeah, I would like it to be at least acknowledged that we were 100% fucking right about everything we said in that video.
I mean, yeah, name one thing that we said in that video that is incorrect. I'll be happy if you can provide proof or point out some kind of mistake we made. I'll be happy to correct.
I'll admit it was mostly speculation, but the thing is, it like what we were saying, it turned out to be like proven to be unquestionably true.
And like, it had a lot more explanatory power. Sorry.
Oh no, I was done.
Yeah, just going to remark that it had a lot more explanatory power than a lot of the mainstream media theories did. I mean, how many times did Brenton Tarrant in his own manifesto break the Australian dialect?
Yeah, I mean, it was very sloppily put together. It was still, it was just very weird. Everything about it was incredibly sketchy. Where that guy had been. I mean, I still stand by everything that was in the video because I mean, I never really, didn't stand by it. It's just, yeah. I mean, a lot of people were like, that's like a lot of what I've been seeing. The sort of the neo-Marxists talking about it or whatever is just That's tinfoil hat shit. Well, I mean, it's provably true now. So, when you're going to apologize, I'll be my DMs are open.
Yay. And we got a super chat from Brocron0, who may or may not be Sircon, asking if Sircon is alive. Well,
I don't know. You tell
no.
me.
No, he's not. He died. I don't know how he died, but yeah, he's not. He unalived.
Oof.
I'm
That's
making
a
a
lot
joke,
of
by the way. He is
bullets.
definitely alive.
Yeah, thank God you clarified. Otherwise, people were actually going to be who actually remember people who actually remember Sircon are going to be like, wait a minute, he's dead.
We were
And
just talking to him yesterday.
yeah, I mean, they're actually, not to get. I don't know. There are actually quite a few people who died this decade. Can't
Yeah.
forget about that.
On the
Like
plus side,
Terry A. Davis.
Sircon joining the undisclosed branch of the military did actually turn him into an anarchist, so that's good news.
Which is why he is no longer Sircon.
Well, I think now he's just going by Sircon instead of the full name,
Okay.
which for reasons related to his service in the military, I will not elaborate on any further.
Rest in peace, Seth Rich, who committed suicide by shooting himself in the back of the head twice.
hmm And I just want to say something to Black Spruce, who's asking us for advice on the rise of Skywalker. He says he's going to see it tomorrow because he got free tickets.
Oh well, I mean, go ahead and do that. Then, if the tickets were free, I mean, why
Yeah.
not?
I mean, it's, here's the thing, like, I say it's worse than The Last Jedi, but only slightly worse.
I mean, I personally wouldn't buy tickets. Yeah, I've seen it as well, and I gotta say, I feel ripped off. But no, if the tickets were free, uh, I don't know. Turn your brain off because it's definitely an eye candy kind of movie.
I didn't even think it was that. I didn't even think it was eye candy. I mean, some of the set pieces were really, really good. I'll admit that. However, the action was very hard to follow, and the shots were the. I mean, we talked about the pacing, right? How the pacing was just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, it just it's 8:04 here. So who in the audience did it just become New Year's for? So it
Uh,
must be somebody because that's four
no,
hours 4 hours ahead. That would be
it would
uh,
have to be. It only became New Year's for people who are currently in the Atlantic Ocean.
yeah. God damn it! All right. Well, presumably we don't have any viewers who are from the Bahamas because it turned New Year's there.
Oh well, they're in the actually they're in the Atlantic Ocean, so they count. And yeah, Invergent is correct. It was absolutely very rushed. You'll find that, like, for all of its faults in its writing, The Last Jedi was very well paced. I can give it that. They knew what they were doing there, and that scenes took as much time as they needed to, and there was a very clear progression of events. The Rise of Skywalker was just absolutely horrendously paced.
My favorite media that came out of the 2010s is try hard trolling.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is actually something that's pretty good that came out of the 2010s that I'm glad that it happened. Now it sucks that the two main streamers, Ice Poseidon and Bathrobe Dwayne, are now banned, but yeah, they were good while they lasted.
Yeah. Now let me see here. When I was talking about the media, we only touched on music, but I also wanted to talk about TVs and movies, which is the, like, whereas music is largely manufactured nowadays, written by like two guys. Television, it's kind of expected. So that's not nearly as much of a problem as it is. The trouble is that the themes, ideas, characters, and plots are very well depressing. Every set is going to have some kind of grimy, desaturated color, and even if there is color, it's usually some kind of it's always some kind of like grimy, off, like Pier One style. Plus,
Yeah, that's
characters are usually going to be jerks, assholes. Not like I've heard people defend them. It's like, oh, you see, these characters are just flawed. No, they're not flawed. They're assholes. Flawed
yeah,
means
that's
that
that's a big part of the reason why I just don't watch TV anymore because everything is like that, and I just don't enjoy it. It's depressing, bleak.
it's it's very unpleasant to watch, especially like when you have shows where characters just stab each other in the back for no discernible reason with all
Well,
sorts of contrived conflict.
yeah, well, that and the fact there's just more entertaining content online.
Yeah, that's also
Some
completely true.
Somebody said make more films like the Joker. Dude, I fucking I would love to see like art of your avatar and my avatar dressed up like the Joker on that one scene from the Joker where he's walking down the staircase, except it's both of our avatars.
And we're doing those dance moves.
Yeah,
It can
somebody
be
should
done.
make that.
Except I don't think we'll have to be using the same costume. One of us will be dressed like Arthur. The other one will probably be dressed like I would say Mark Hamill's Joker from Batman the Animated Series.
Oh well, then I would be Mark Hamill's Joker because Mark Hamill's Joker is the best Joker.
Eh, I'm only saying that because I remember they did a direct to DVD adaptation of The Killing Joke, and it wasn't great. Even though they got Mark Hamill to come out of retirement and do the Joker voice again. I mean, his performance was good, but what really struck me is that before that was even announced, there was actually a fan made animation that was fully voice acted of the Joker's monologue at the end of The Killing Joke, where he's talking about how everybody is just one bad day away from going completely insane. And the fan made animation, it was a 3D animation, like you can probably find it pretty quickly. And the voice acting was better than Mark Hamill's version.
Wow,
It
that's
was
I'll have to look that up because I mean that's the thing with Mark Hamill is he's a fucking amazing voice actor.
oh
Like
yeah, he's great, but
he's
I
like up
think
there. And I don't have a list of voice actors, but I'd say off the top of my head, next to Orson Welles, he's the one I could think of that I love like the most.
mhm. And I was thinking about this the other day, and the reason that I find that one better is because that version of that, or the fan made version of the Joker, kind of goes through a lot more of emotion, goes through a lot more of an emotional spectrum. He is changing his. You can see like just him going through a gambit of emotions as he's really talking about the idea, and it's very interesting to like go into like what he's thinking about, and it's just a lot more compelling. Whereas Mark Hamill is just like he goes from the gambit of emotions to from sadism to anger, which is good, but it's not nearly as well interesting.
While we're
But
talking, we glazed over music so quickly, I didn't even get to say something I wanted to say, which is the most underrated album of the entire fucking decade came out in 2010, and like everybody missed it. It is called Project Conflict by Insolence. Look that up. It is fucking the most banging album ever.
excellent. Well, with me, I don't really listen to normal music. You could say mostly it's just like it's neoclassical composers and trailer music studios. But
I
yeah,
mean,
the
I was just gonna say, there's even a song for all you cockroach haters called Molotov, and it's fucking awesome.
Glorious. Now, I do think that the Joker, the one that came out earlier this year, is actually a perfect descriptor of the 2010s as a decade in general. Everything, one of the ongoing themes that was in that movie is just like this guy was just constantly being beat down. The system didn't care about him at all, and in fact went out of its way to make sure that the means by which he would be able to defend himself from otherwise predatory people is otherwise destructive to him. So he's going to be beaten down, and if you raise your hand to defend yourself, how dare you? And of course he snapped. Who wouldn't under that situation? Now the Joker is of course an amazing movie, and it's very well done. The plot and the conflict is not at all contrived. There's a very clear motivation for characters to be doing what they're doing. But yeah, I think it's a very good description of I think the mood of the 2010s. It's just people trying to go through their lives, but continuously being beaten down.
I mean, yeah, I'd say that's probably why so many people loved it so much. It's because
Yeah,
it resonates with, I'd say, like 95% of the population.
it resonates with the times, and those kinds of movies that can successfully capture the mood of the times are what's going to be popular. I'm going to maintain until the day I die that the Star Wars prequels were made like 15 years too early. If they were made today, like they would be beloved. And I'm not just saying that because the memes or the prequel memes basically gave the meme or gave the movies a second life. Now, with that said, like there is one other thing that we'll need to talk about in terms of the movies and entertainment of the decade that really captured the mood of the times, and that is the superhero movie genre. Now, naturally, superhero movies have been around since, superheroes, but I think that there's a kind of theme that the superhero genre touches upon that most people don't talk about or even aware of, and that is powerlessness. And that might seem odd because you see Captain America, you see Superman, you see Green Lantern, or any one of these other superheroes who are capable of doing amazing things. Why aren't ordinary people doing these things? They can't. I mean, you're
Well,
not gifted with Kryptonian biology or some other MacGuffin that gives you amazing powers.
and
You're it's
I think
sorry.
that you're certainly onto something here because I mean, yeah, if you look at the time that the sort of superhero genre came into prominence, it was like late 20s. That's when the first comic started being made, but um, they started really blowing up throughout the 30s and the 40s, which I mean I got to tell you, based on what we know about the 30s and the 40s, uh I mean I think I'd rather be dead than alive at the time.
And the problem with the superheroes, it's it's kind of a subjective thing, but in my opinion and from my own observations, what you see are very powerful beings who can otherwise solve these crises that are completely the premise of the superhero genre is that there are problems that are completely out of the hands of ordinary people, and
I
that we
mean,
need these great and powerful messiahs to come down from the sky with their superpowered robot suits or just their superpowers in general in order to, solve these problems.
have you read what Benjamin Tucker wrote in 1929? Because he lived just long enough to see World War II start.
No, I don't think I did. What do you say?
Well, I mean, I like read his opinion of what the world was like in his like last decade. And yeah, I think that's probably pretty close. That's the libertarian perspective in the 20s and early 30s. That's what it would have been like. Just knowing that he was never going to see a free society and that the world was only getting worse. So, I mean, could you imagine, and at the time, being a libertarian when it was so difficult to actually espouse information, and there were only like a couple hundred of them in any given country, probably even less with countries that had smaller populations. I mean, yeah, if I were around at the time, it would be just like now, except without the internet and without the ability to actually talk to people, and without without the fact that there is an increasing amount of the population who are becoming state skeptical. Except that, in fact, that was reversed at the time. During the late 20s, it was actually the other way around. It was an increasing amount of the population who were becoming, state socialists or fascists, and that was being seen increasingly as the new order. And there wasn't even that counter economic backbone because encryption didn't exist yet, and cryptocurrencies and these things which made sort of state power irrelevant.
And I think I can touch on what mood that the superhero genre captures upon that allows it to resonate with 2010's audience that would otherwise be, downtrodden, depressed. The feeling that they capture is despair. And that might seem odd, but keep in mind that there's a sense of great and horrible crises that only gods are able to solve. It's yearning out. It touches upon the yearning out for some savior to come down and solve all the problems for them. It reinforces a sense of disempowerment that the good number of people today already feel, and they're seeing that reflected. More importantly, because of how the superhero genre works, they get to see that these great and horrible problems that exist in their universe actually do get solved. So it creates this sense that, yes, these problems are solvable. They're just not solvable by me, which of course is simply not true at all. The problems are easily solvable by us, even as individuals. The trouble is that, well, it's the disempowerment that we were talking about earlier. The reason that the MCU is so popular is, yeah, they can tell good stories, but yeah, you put Infinity War in the 2000s, I don't think it would have been nearly as popular as it is today.
And that's another thing that came out of the 2010s. I was talking earlier about libertarianism becoming increasingly unterrified towards the end of the decade. There being like a really nice prominence of, classical 19th century individualist anarchism being married with Austrian economics, kind of like the French liberal economists like Gustave de Molinari. That's sort of what the winning argument in libertarianism is now, except in the 21st century. So a lot more of them are counter economists because they have computers and they're using those computers to circumvent the state, which is something that didn't exist at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But just what I was going to say is, yeah, libertarianism went back to its roots towards the end of this decade, not as any sort of affiliation within the political system or something that complements the existing political affiliations, because the state has largely itself shattered that narrative indirectly in trying to separate conservatism from libertarianism by making it a neo-reactionary movement. What's happened actually is just what I was trying to say is crypto anarchism sort of become the and agorism and counter economics have become the main leanings in libertarianism. And libertarianism, at its core, has become recognized as what it was in its classical form, a refutation of politics, not something which conforms to either way.
Sorry, I'm just currently spoiling the Rise of Skywalker in the chat.
Oh, but
Yeah,
yeah,
Kylo Ren dies and Mary Sue is a Palpatine.
oof. But yeah, I don't think anyone watching here this stream was particularly interested in seeing that movie, or at least I hope not. So
I think
I feel too bad about it.
the people who are going to be watching this stream either don't care or have already seen it. They don't mind being spoiled. I mean, I remember like Insurgent was DMing me before. I think I told you before. He saw the movie and he told me like everything that happened.
Yeah,
So it I don't think it ruined the movie for me at all. But I mean, I think I told you before, like when we were chatting about it. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but that whole Sith ritual of Palpatine creating like this gigantic spectacle of Rey to killing him so that she can become the true Sith successor. I loved that bit. That was great.
yeah. I mean, just Palpatine in general, his life support arm. I fucking that was the best part of the entire movie is just Palpatine's design. Honestly,
It really was really good. Everything about just Palpatine in general is just he is the best part of every movie he's in. He just has a I don't remember the actor's name. Ian
Ian
McDermott.
McDermott. Yeah,
Yeah, he is just his charisma as Palpatine is just he dominates the scene, and I was genuinely sad to see him die, and he died in absolutely the dumbest way too. Oh, and
yeah.
Black Spruce asks, how did he survive falling and the Death Star exploding? Well, keep in mind, Palpatine didn't just fall. He fell into a Death Star reactor, exploded, and then the Death Star exploded. And then the pieces of the Death Star presumably burned up into atmosphere onto Endor, which then would have broken into pieces further. So how did he survive? It's never mentioned in the movie. It's just he survived.
But he gets killed by Mary Sue.
He gets killed by Mary Sue in such a way that he could have easily saved himself.
Yeah,
Like it wouldn't
like
even have been
he
hard.
saw that in Revenge of the Sith, that little the Force lightning contest between Sidious and Yoda. We know that Sidious could have saved himself because he that didn't kill him before.
And we know that, for example, he could just turn the lightning off. You could just stop trying to zap her. The moment that he started to get the lightning reflected back on him, he should have been like, okay, this isn't working. I'm just gonna go ahead and use the force to throw you into the ceiling. Have fun.
He could be another clone, though.
He could be another
They could
clone.
try that.
Then in that case, like Palpatine's just going to be an antagonist for all time. They're just continuously returning and returning, which, by the way, they already did. I'm assuming you're familiar with the Old Republic.
Yeah,
In the MMO, they have Vitiate, who is the Emperor of the Sith Empire. His thing is that he can just hop between bodies. You, the player, actually do end up killing him after he tries to take possession of your body, and you kill his spirit inside of your mind. But yeah, I mean that's been done. So also another thing, like how was Rey able to reflect the lightning so easily? I mean, when Windu did it, you could see him visibly struggling. It was hard. But here, like Mary Sue just holds out her lightsaber in front of her, just like, yeah, this is a thing. Freaking hell, like Mary Sue is somehow stronger than Mace Windu. who has a fighting style specialized specifically at fighting Sith.
But I don't know if we're at the conclusion of the stream. God, I hope not. But if we are,
We're
the one
124 in.
okay. Well, the one thing that I was gonna say about the 2010s and Filthy's, he agrees with me on this because we were talking about this before the stream, is that what defines the 2010s is not even necessarily things that happened in the 2010s, because as we've gone over already, the things that uniquely happened in the 2010s are kind of shit. They're not good things. They're not going to be looked back on fondly. But yeah, the things that are positive, like libertarianism going back to its roots, or the fourth turning, and a lot of these other things which sort of define the decade and are going to eventually lead to the 2020s being what the 2020s will be, are things that happened before 2010, or are things that we only learned about in 2010?
It's going to be kind of hard, I think, because we're kind of in it. We'll only really know like what major events happened in 2010 that really changed things for all time. But my prediction is that 2020 bunker down because things are going to get fun.
Well, for me, it really is going to be fun. I don't know about you guys, but you better make sure that you're prepared. That's all I will say. That's all I'll say about it.
Which the way you prepare is one, buy a gun off the black market, two, buy and stock up on non-perishable food. You can look up how to do that, but it's like usually cereal, rice, dried pasta, bottled water, dehydrated milk, that sort of thing. Like things that have a very good shelf life. Also, you can order some things online, like prep kits for that kind of thing. Another thing you can do is stock up on precious metals and cryptocurrency. Some people will tell you to buy only cryptocurrency or only gold. I recommend getting both because they're
Here's
both going to be useful.
here's an extra big brain strategy, which I was also talking with Filthy Heretic about. Save up a bunch of cryptocurrency now, and then once the financial crash happens and once the US dollar is basically worthless, buy a very inconsequential amount of US dollars, like spend by which I mean spend an inconsequential amount of cryptocurrency and get like tens of thousands of US dollars. Keep in mind that this will be like when US dollars are, you could buy a candy bar for a couple thousand US dollars. The reason why you should do this is because in a couple decades after the financial collapse is over, and after we live in a stateless society, the US dollars are going to become collector's items and are going to be worth lots. So make sure to save them up.
I recommend getting $2 bills because one, their circulation they won't have very high value because again, $2 bills. But as collector's items, they'll be extraordinarily valuable simply because of how rare they are. They're rare today. So yeah, I recommend that's what you should be trying to get once the currency collapses and becomes absolutely worthless. When you get to the Weimar Germany levels of needing to bring a wheelbarrow to the store just to buy a loaf of bread. And yes, Al, that guy in the comments says it absolutely correct. Stay away from the cities.
Absolutely. Somebody asks, am I into firearms? Presumably they're talking to me because they wrote that when I was talking. Yes, I am. I've owned near a dozen, and I could safely say not a single one of them that's come through my possession, I bought or made legally.
Nice. I still need to get some more. Mostly because I'm shy.
That's like Virgin versus Chad. That's the Chad. Uh, that's like Chad criteria stuff right there.
Pretty much.
Has owned a dozen firearms. Not a single one of them is legal.
Excellent. And Neva DiCario, just find where the drug dealers are. I'm assuming if you're in the suburbs, like those places are very drug heavy. Most people don't really know about that. But look around, especially at night. Try to find shady people. Ask around for drugs. You don't actually want the drugs, but the people who sell the drugs, people who make the drugs, and just generally people involved in that trade are going to know who has guns, and there they can direct you to it.
Yeah, I was the one that mentioned that to him. That's a good way to find an inn. But it also matters who you talk to. If like the person that you find has drugs ends up being like a shopkeep owner or something, or they have some sort of major role in the white market, odds are they're getting protection, quote unquote, from the mafia. So you don't want to do anything with them.
Yeah, usually, or their business is some kind of drug or some kind of laundering scheme.
Because that's exactly what that means. If they have a white market business that they deal out of, it means they're a front. So it more than likely the money that you give to them is going to be going back to the CIA.
Most likely, or at least some CIA front group. So let's see here. We're at 1 hour 30. Is there anything left we need to go over? Because I think we've touched upon everything that's really going to be important.
Uh, I mean, not particularly. Faithless asking if we're going to follow our own advice. Well, I mean, I don't know about filthy. Yeah, you could just go to the nightclubs in your case. As for me, I mean, it wouldn't really matter because like there are very few times where I am like if I'm walking out in the middle of the night, I'm not the most intimidating person on the street.
Which I know what you look like. You look like the exact kind of people that government schools warned me about.
Oof.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Also, people have been asking us about Venezuela a lot. Should we touch on that?
Sure. What about Venezuela?
I mean, there's really not much to say. They've gone from basically in the toilet in earlier this decade to basically being a third world crap hole in 2019, to the
Yeah,
point where like their society is on the brink of collapse and their continued existence is basically subsidized by their black markets.
yeah, and they're probably rather ironically going to be one of the first stateless societies,
Hmm.
at least in the current order of states. I mean, there are anarchies that exist within some of the bigger states, but yeah. Another thing I was going to say about Venezuela is it's actually a pretty good something that you'll hear a lot from a lot of these sort of culture warrior types is the argument that you hear the rhetoric, politics is downstream from culture. This idea that there's just sort of a social existence that somehow is outside of the human action which makes up the culture that it exists in. Well, it's in that argument being used, for immigration. Oh, you gotta have the state pointing guns at children and forcing them back to their countries. Otherwise, black people will come into your country, and all black people are communists, and they'll take the form of Blacktron and smash your freedom. But I mean, Venezuela, it's one of the most, at least that's pointed to in the media. It's one of the most despotic, not, I wouldn't say despotic, but it's one of the poorest places on earth. And yeah, so according to this narrative, you'd expect it to, you'd expect the society there to be very, Marxist or Marx inspired. But actually, it's not. If you look at like protest footage in Caracas, you'll see ANCAP flags everywhere. And, most of the cryptocurrency traders in South America are in like northern Brazil and Venezuela. On top of that, something that you'll see, some of the bigger channels in South America that talk about politics are people like Kogos, who are libertarians. So it seems like that's actually the exact opposite, and Venezuela is a good case study of that. They have a government which uses Marxism as a legitimizing tool for its socio-political order, but it's one of the most libertarian societies, I'd say, probably on earth.
Second only to Brazil, I would imagine.
So I think that's another reason why I'd say Venezuela is pretty notable. Is it makes you'd think it's weird to point to Venezuela in response to bordertarians, but I mean, no, that's exactly where you should probably point to. It refutes the entire premise of their argument. Well, aside from the fact that voting is not a means of achieving political change and that all state actors have the same interests.
Let's see here. Faithless Berserker is asking if I will do a face reveal in 2025. No. I mean, it depends on what I'm doing in 2025. I can't guarantee I'll continue making videos in 2025 since a whole lot can change in 5 years. But if I still am, then unless I hit 10 million subscribers, then no.
You're saying that like it's freaking you plan on not making videos. I'll be making videos as long as the state's still around.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope you will too. And if we have to be, it'll be unfortunate if we're making a 2030 retrospective of the 2020s, especially because in that retrospective, I'm gonna have boomer archetypes. We both are,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, don't say it like that.
I mean, I'm kind of being non-committal here. A lot, as I said, a lot can change in 5 years. I could be too busy to devote that time. It could be that the state has collapsed and there's really not much of a point anymore. The whole lot can change. And if the state is gone, I probably will end up doing a face reveal. But right now, yeah, everybody is also speculating as to what my race is.
Abolish the state, and Filthy will do a face reveal.
Okay, so I'll add that to the list of conditions. 10 million subscribers, $10,000 Patreon reward, and or the state collapses. Either one of those three things happens, and I'll do a face reveal.
People are why do people want to know your race so badly?
I don't freaking know.
Okay.
I mean, I've never really wondered that about other people.
What will I do afterwards? Omen asks. I probably the first couple years at least I'll travel quite a bit. because that's what I want to do now, but I can't do. I have to do it very seldomly.
Me, I'll probably spend the first year or two in choice paralysis before I finally settle down on something that I enjoy doing, making. It'll probably be something very hands on, but still very useful. I can imagine myself getting into, I'm not going to say carpentry, but like wood making, creating, what are those things called? Like wooden furniture, that sort of thing. I could see myself doing that and start making money, yeah, selling chairs for Bitcoin or Litecoin, as it were.
Plot twist: Filthy is a butch female.
I can't confirm or deny anything. However, I have referred to myself as a male multiple times.
Filthy is a Mexican. Probably. I mean, he has goats in his backyard.
That would just make me a Muslim.
Who the hell raises animals in their backyard other than Mexicans?
Ranchers. Also, literally anyone living in Texas who wants to get a livestock exemption in property taxes.
So that's why they do it. All
Yes,
right.
that's it's like, and it's not like a small one either. Like if the difference is between paying $1,400 in property taxes or paying $14.
Yeah, those Mexicans, they're very clever counter economists.
It's almost like keeping them out through a stupid border wall and seizing people's property in order to build it is not a good idea. Who would have thought? What cryptocurrency will be the most beneficial when the state collapses? That's impossible to say.
I'd say Dash is probably a good candidate because it scales pretty well. What are our thoughts about on the Libertarian Party and
Gay.
and the fact that the biggest libertarians are trying to take it over? Well, what do you mean by the biggest libertarians? Adam Kokesh? Because I can tell you right now, Adam Kokesh is not a big libertarian. In fact, he's just like the Libertarian Party. He's widely despised. A lot of people don't like him very much. And if you want to know why, just look up a video Larkin Rose made about him called Adam Kokesh, the Anarcho-Stalinist. That'll explain why people have such hang-ups with him.
And of course, the Libertarian Party is absolutely broken for the same reason that Hoppianism as a philosophy is. It's attempting to achieve their ends by basically playing directly into the state's hands and the mechanism by which the state maintains its power.
Oh, God.
It's absolutely destructive.
You've done it now. Oh
I've
no!
done it.
Here come the Hoppians
Oh crap.
in the live comments. I don't know. I made I don't know how many of you have seen that, but yeah, there's this meme template where it's a bunch of people who are having a conversation. The second panel is, oh no, here come the, and then blank group that the meme is making fun of. And then there's the next panel is, yeah, just a bunch of those people running into where they were having a discussion, shitting on each other.
That's pretty much how a Hoppian discussion goes, like all the time. Why don't they? I'd like for them to tell me more about how a dictatorship is democratic. Or how the idea of governments I don't like are democracy can somehow be consistent with the same philosopher who said that that the problems with the democracy are that rulers are not in power for long enough, and thus they have a shorter slash higher time preference.
Black people are a democracy.
Gay people are a democracy.
The United States government is a Hoppian covenant community.
Everything I don't like is degeneracy.
Everything I do like is a covenant community.
This conversation, according to the definition, or one of the definitions of a covenant community I've seen, us talking, as in you and me, is a covenant community. because we're agreeing to abide by a certain set of informal rules.
But
the fact that
there's no contract, and Hoppe specifically says there has to be a contract.
that's why they created this idea of the informal contract. But we agree to speak in the English language, and we agree to abide by the definition of words written in the English language. So therefore, it's an informal contract.
Yeah, okay.
It's
I love how like he got into like an academic debate. Hoppe did. There's two of them that I thought were really funny. That I've like seen. There's one that he got into monarchies versus democracies, and it was basically the other person that he was debating pointed out that modern democracies are objectively, like governments that are democracies, are objectively wealthier than state societies with monarchies. And Hoppe's response is those monarchies have more black people in them, and black people have higher time preferences.
I mean, if you could point to a study that shows that black people have a higher / shorter time preference, I guess you could make that case. But trying to cite that as a reason why, I would think that if monarchy is superior, it wouldn't matter, right? It wouldn't matter the race of the people.
I mean, forget all the black billionaires. I guess just no, all black people. They just they sit around in their studio apartments, and they are they're in that position because they don't want to save up. They blow all their money on KFC and watermelon, and purple drink, and women. Also, the other thing that Hoppe is on record saying in one of his lectures that I thought was fucking hilarious was him trying to make the case that John Maynard Keynes, his economic theory was informed by the fact that John Maynard Keynes was apparently gay. Like he was allegedly gay, and that's the reason why Keynesianism exists. I think that's hilarious.
Honestly, I can see. I kind of sympathize with that, actually.
Keynes comes along saying, "Is this economic theory, Papa? Nah, mate, you gay."
Now, I do actually sympathize with that remark because, as I'm sure you're aware, like there actually is a difference between time preferences between, let's say, single people and married people with kids, because suddenly their understanding of future events expands beyond their own lifetimes, as they expect to die at 80 or 90. But now, like they actually, because of because of being biologically programmed to care for the next generation, they actually care about what happens after. Naturally, gay people don't have kids. So you have a gay person coming up with an economic system that largely is only going to quote unquote function and last for as long as they themselves are still alive. So it kind of makes sense. It's not a perfect explanation, but it at least is understandable, and it has a lot more. And it also explains the famous Keynes quote, where he is confronted by the fact that his ideas are unsustainable, and he just snapped back, saying, "Like in the long run, we're all dead." Well, of course, that's someone who has no stake in the next generation is going to come to that conclusion, because what do they care? What happens afterwards?
But I mean, there are a lot of reasons why Keynes. I mean, the thing is, he probably did have a high time preference, but there were a lot of other reasons why Keynes, would have had a high time preference. For one, he was basically the archetypal snooty Cambridge elitist who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. never worked a day in his life. He fucking and he came from a family that had clout within the state. So I mean, obviously he's gonna have a high time preference because he was raised with the impression that he was just going to be handed everything in life.
Which, of course, is exactly what happened, or at least what he presented forward. And no, Black Spruce, he wouldn't be a boomer. I actually don't remember what year was he born.
I think it was 18. I don't know the exact year, but it was prior to the 20th century.
Let me see here.
Well, the one thing that I've always said about Keynesianism is that if you treat it as an economic theory, then you're going to have problems. But if you look at it as an explanation for the state's incentives and how the state will act to obtain revenue for itself, then Keynesianism carries a pretty decent amount of explanatory power.
Oh yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And of course, it's also hilarious is that Keynes's followers quickly bastardized Keynes's own theories. They basically the forms of post-Keynesianism and neo-Keynesianism, including modern monetary theory, they cut Keynes's theory in half.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
I mean, if people recall, Keynes's theory was basically attempting to level the business cycle, which means pumping spending when the economy was low and cutting down spending when the economy was high.
People talking about Austrian theorists in the chat. Sorry, I'll let you continue. Never mind.
All right, so with this in mind, like the attempt was to level out the business cycle. The problem is that, well, when in practice, it's never in the government's incentive to actually cut down spending, since, well, their interest is not to cut down the business cycle. It's to try to create as much revenue as possible. So as a result, the whole cutting back spending when the economy is great simply did not happen. We've simply been going off of half of Keynesian theory for, well, ever since the theory came about. Hell, even before. You had Herbert Hoover during his administration. He was practicing Keynesianism even before Keynes published his book. I forget the title of it off the top of my head.
I'm just reading what Insurgent wrote in chat. Making fun of people for being entitled is like making fun of people for being abused. I mean, yeah, that might be true, but I mean, it's John Maynard Keynes we're talking about, and he was a fucking pedophile, so he can fucking suck on a fucking bullet for all I care.
There are just some people who deserve it, and Keynes is arguably one of the least sympathetic people in history. It would be like you could probably point to Adolf Hitler and how in his childhood he was pretty frequently beaten so bad by his dad that he was put into a hospital in a coma. This actually happened. But we're talking about literally Hitler here. He's hardly the most sympathetic figure.
This is what I was gonna say to Awesome Ant earlier. People talking about Henry Hazlitt. I've gone back and I've read some of the late French liberal theorists, like Gustave de Molinari, for example, or Yves Goyot, or even Turgot would be a good example of this. The more obscure ones, and I found that a lot of their arguments are just better versions of later Austrian arguments. Like their theory is incomplete, but the structure of their claims, their premises, and the way that they articulate their conclusions, it's much stronger in both sort of how their arguments are framed and also the explanatory power of their positions. For example, Goyot He wrote The Socialistic Fallacies a decade prior to Mises publishing The Socialist Commonwealth, and his he articulated the economic calculation problem 10 years prior to Mises. Not only that, but Mises identified the economic calculation problem as a problem with conveying information, whereas Yevis, he identified pretty correctly that yeah, it's an information problem, but it's an information problem which exists specifically because of the lack of exclusive ownership. Whereas with Mises's attempt to articulate that, that was not entirely established. And because of that, there were market socialists who came along and pointed out, well, hey, here's this planned economy that has markets, and though there are market signals here, well, so you're wrong. But if you were going to, if you were going to go with Goyot's interpretation of the ECP, the more accurate one, that would not be an argument you can make because it correctly identified the fact that if the state were to attempt to manufacture a market, that would essentially just be the same problem, but with an extra step. The state's just manufacturing those market signals. They don't actually represent anything because they're not actually being signaled from producer to consumer. There's not actually any transfer going on.
Yeah, and I remember actually, I haven't actually read that, but I did encounter that alternative idea of the economic calculation problem when I was doing research on my own video. I don't remember what the topic was, but I remember the economic calculation problem being an important part of it, and finding that the Misesian explanation was rather lacking because you can solve it by having a sufficiently powerful processor, central planning computer, to be able to figure out and process this information. Whereas if you explain it as a problem of the information that needs to be learned does not exist in a market economy or in a centrally planned, even quasi market economy, then yeah, it's ultimately impossible for a centrally planned economy to work.
Another problem that I've thought about with the supercomputer argument is it no matter what, you can't get around the problem of the planner requiring resources to be consumed, so it's still not an efficient way to calculate resources, because even if you were to have this supercomputer, there would only be so many resources that the planners could use to distribute um, these sort of commodities from a central point of distribution. So it would still necessarily not be efficient. Another problem with it, of course, is that information is relative, and how not information, but how information is interpreted. Oh yeah, it's New Year's on the East Coast, so there's a subset of people who are watching this. It's 2020 for them. Well, I am still stuck in 2019, and I think Filthy is too. So
Yeah, New Year is happening, but Happy New Year to people on the East Coast. Yay. I mean, how dare the East Coast be a decade ahead of us?
yeah, please take me with you. I hate this decade, and I can't spend another 3 hours in it.
Well, it's only 1 hour for me, so yay. I'm just going to go ahead and I don't know what I'm going to do for the next hour of the decade.
I have another 3 hours, and I have no idea what I'm gonna do either.
Uh,
Um,
I got an idea. Okay, so do you have Halo for PC yet?
No.
Get it? Well, even if you can't, well, let's just. Have you heard of the game Super Animal World? Or no,
Super
Super.
Animal World. No. Sounds
It's
like a simulation game, and I don't play
no,
the fucking
it's
really.
it's a furry battle royale game, but it's
Oh
actually
God.
good.
Okay. I'll have to look it up then.
It is free, so you don't have to worry about that. One of our FNet developers, Agris, actually recommended it to me, and yeah, I've had a lot of fun with it.
I'll go ahead and try it out then. I guess if you're playing it, maybe we could stream that sometime.
Yeah.
Man.
And also, someone's been asking us about our position on abortion. The question he asked is what our stances and our thoughts on Walter Block's idea of evictionism.
Evictionism. I
The basic, the basic idea.
usually I'm the one who knows about libertarian ideas, but that fucking is a blank to me.
Evictionism is the basic idea that it's an extension of self ownership, that the woman owns themselves and the unborn child
Well, yeah,
is.
I've heard that. I just haven't heard it referred to as evictionism before. Yeah, that was Rothbard's argument, and the problem is that the baby is not an aggressor because the baby didn't exist prior to its conception. So that doesn't really work as an argument.
It basically requires it requires that the child or that the hatchling. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole live birth thing. But anyways, it requires the idea that the hatchling is otherwise an unwanted guest and that they entered it somehow. That they're a
And
trespasser,
they
which
didn't. That just doesn't work.
it doesn't make any sense. Did they teleport here from another dimension? Do you have proof of Plato's world of forms?
And,
If so, then I'd
and
like to
no,
see
we
that.
know as a matter of fact that that's not how it works because the moment that the sperm meets the egg, it creates a new independent strain of DNA. So from both the male and the female. So no,
Suffice
it is the act which creates the being. So you can't say that they're trespassing because the act itself created them.
Mhm. And even in the case of rape, well, the child didn't do
It
anything to cause themselves to come into existence.
the
Putting
uh, the Walter Block argument it implies that the baby is an active party, but as I've demonstrated, it can only be passive. It does not make sense conceptually for that to be for that to not be the case because it didn't fucking exist prior to even having sex.
I don't even know, like, the only thing I can really think of that would justify this is if women were tripping and falling on penises. Which, if so, I think that they would like to know where those penises are and how to avoid them.
Someone asked about Windslayer. Yeah, that's coming along. It's really slow though. We've recently had some news by getting in contact with some of the original developers who heard about our project and are interested in helping out. So I don't know, maybe 2020, probably 2021, early 2021. When it'll be out, I have no idea. But
Well, I think what's really gonna drive that is if the code shredder's finished. That's gonna be massive. Hell, we're gonna be able to open source literally every game with that.
oh yeah, if that's finished before this actual project is finished, which by the way, what Filthy is referring to, we're intending on having that being a part of the finished FNet project, which I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't even mention FNet throughout the entire stream, but that's something we were going to.
Yeah, you said you had some news about that.
Yeah, basically, Doug has, which is one of our developers, one of the main contributors to the project. He has an early build running on a Wi-Fi Pineapple, and we're planning on having some evidence of that. We were gonna have it for the stream, but he hasn't given us like a video or anything yet. So I don't know. In the next week or so, we should have that.
Well, what he told me about the firmware that he got sent and he's able to figure out how it works is that it's wireless Ethernet.
Yeah, so it's not.
It not only works, but it basically works similar to LAN, and you're able to connect it to other devices wirelessly, which recognize the wireless signal as LAN, which is something I don't think, like I was trying to look it up before. While there are wireless LAN servers, typically the way it works is that you connect to the router in your computer via an Ethernet cord. You don't need an Ethernet cord here. The thing recognizes it is as Ethernet, even though it's completely wireless. This doesn't exist anywhere else, as far as I know. This is new technology. So yeah,
And
this is fairly big.
I don't know what Doug is doing, but I want him to make a video demonstrating this. If you're watching this, Doug, you need to do that. I've been telling you that for the last week, and it shouldn't be too hard. Just like, I don't know, borrow a camera. I mean, I know you have a phone because when I went over to the East Coast, we met up. So it's not just you got to get that done. And anyway, with that, I think that that should wrap up the stream.
Yeah, we're already 2 hours over, like a full hour and 5 minutes longer than I actually planned the stream on going. But that's fine. It's the end of the
You,
year. It's the
yeah,
end of the decade, so we kind of have a lot to talk about.
you planned on making this an hour stream, even though it was going to be covering the entire decade.
Yes.
That okay? That does not seem like it's very well planned out.
I mean, yeah, but things happen.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, we should start wrapping this up.
Anyway, yeah. So see you all in 2020. Next time that we make a video. By the time most of you see this, the compilation from this stream I'll be uploading on our channel. It'll be 2020. So
Yeah, and meanwhile, I'm going to be coming out of hiatus, so expect videos actually from me this new decade.
yeah, and I'm working on an essay. I'm also gonna start recording those sort of semi-news videos a lot more often because I enjoyed those, the ones that I made for Christmas. So if you enjoyed those, make sure and tell me about it if that you did, because I'm under the impression they were well received and I liked making them, so I don't have an objection to making any more.
Excellent. I'm going to try to make some more meme videos. However, I need ideas.
All
Well,
right.
I'll worry about that later. All right. Well, anyways, thanks everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Bye.